Nietzsche once said, not to trust any idea that came to you indoors. He was a prolific walker. He did his thinking while walking outdoors. In part, this is why his writing is aphoristic. He would jot short notes as he walked. Then, of course, there was Aristotle and his peripatetics, so called because of their habit of strolling while philosophizing. In Kyoto, in Japan, there's the Philosopher's Walk, frequented by famous sages. There is a long and seemingly natural correlation between philosophizing and taking a walk. There is actually much to be said on this. The connection is not accidental and unimportant. How we embody certain modes of mental life is an important but somewhat neglected matter. The greatest of all walkers was John, known as Walking Stewart. This John, known as Walking Stewart, stands out as a character of merit for these presentations on several counts. He was a philosopher, an eccentric, and in a fashion an Orientalist. Briefly, he walked the length and breadth of several continents, most impressively walking from Madras back to his native Scotland, whereupon he was nicknamed Walking. Then he set out again. He was inordinately fond of walking. Along the way, he assembled his own philosophy, which included, most interestingly, an admixture of some of the materialist yogas of India. We are unsure of what elements he acquired where, but he insisted on his own intuitions gleaned largely, it seems, from conversations and ruminations on the road from Madras to Glasgow. Counted as a freethinker, which is to say not a Christian, Stewart was an associate of Thomas Taylor, the Platonist, and Taylor's intellectual circle when he wasn't on the road, which is some recommendation. We need to picture him as tall and strapping, walking across Indo-Eurasia, dressed in the shabby Armenian coat, which was his trademark. His philosophy, which we can call sensate materialism, is not unworthy in itself, although he was notorious for the incautious zeal with which he promulgated it on his travels. He was, regrettably, a convert to his own ideas. An adventurer, a larger-than-life character, and abrasive in a menacingly Scottish way. It is fair to say that few people took him seriously as a thinker, but his philosophy is not without merit and deserves some consideration, both as it stands and as a curious amalgam of Eastern and Western ideas formed uniquely in a crucible of epic perambulations. He announced his philosophical findings to the public in his 1790 publication entitled Travels over the Most Interesting Parts of the Globe. His creed, sensate materialism, goes more or less as follows. The cosmos is a unity consisting of a single substance made of small particles in perpetual motion, endlessly recombining into new forms. All things share the same single substance and are thus interrelated. This interrelatedness is a core idea in Stewart's worldview. It was a great discovery for him. My atoms become your atoms, our atoms. We're all linked at the most basic level. But the substance of the cosmos is not insensitive, according to Stewart. The tiny particles carry the imprint of the experiences of the organisms they constitute, hence sensate materialism. The cosmos is made of a single substance, matter, just as the atomists supposed. But this matter is not dead and stupid as they suppose, but sensate, sensitive, impressionable. In its presentation, this is where Stewart amends the errors of Western atomism. He agrees pretty much with the model, but he disagrees about the nature of the prima materia. It is not insensitive and inert. Stewart takes something of the Eastern idea of a universal consciousness, although his cosmos is not conscious, merely sensitive. That is, when matter combines into certain forms, sensate forms, it too has this sensate quality, and the particles are marked by, or imprinted by, or share in, or appropriate sensate experiences. This means that feelings and sensations influence or colour the particles of the cosmos. If we are sad, our particles are sad. If we are happy and fulfilled, our particles are happy and fulfilled, although this is to give a crude version of it. It follows that if matter is sensate, then sensations change the very nature of the universe. Our happiness or suffering changes the very substance of things. On his vast wanderings, he walked through Persia, Russia, Arabia, Afghanistan, every country in Europe. Stewart explored all the various implications and paradoxes that followed from this realisation. Most important for him was the conclusion that to cause suffering is to damage the cosmos itself. To cause suffering stains the very substance of all things. Thus, moral actions have not merely individual or social consequences, but cosmic consequences. Since everything is interconnected by a single impressionable substance, our duties are cosmic to all things and to all creatures, and not merely selfish or social. So the impact of our sensations is not fleeting, according to Stewart, but enduring. Other beings in future are affected, and since, Stewart reasons, all the particles that make us up are taken up again and again into new forms, future recombinations of ourselves are also affected. To cause suffering harms the cosmos as a whole, and is, in the end, self-harming. Thus it was that Walking Stewart proposed an atomism of sentience. Atoms, particles, the basic substance, to be clear, is not inherently sentient, but potentially so. When it combines into the forms of complex sentient beings, the experience of such beings leave a mark on the cosmos. Stewart seemed unconcerned with the details of exactly how particles can be affected by the sensations of creatures. He didn't make a contribution to particle physics. But he was resolute in his conviction that matter is not indifferent, but receives impressions. It seems that he thought of matter, the prima materia, as recording or remembering the experiences of creatures. When we die, of course, our particles are dispersed, but they persist and reform into new things, and because they have moved through the human state, they can carry the imprint of it into the future. Stewart was aware that we are shedding particles all the time, in our breath, from our skin, in our waste. So if we are evil, we are putting evil particles out into the world all the time, and harming the entire universe, and in the first instance other beings who take in these same particles by food or drink or air. Our moral responsibilities are cosmic in scale. Stewart proposes an atomist cosmology that has as a natural outcome a creed of universal sympathy and compassion. Rather than a bleak and nihilistic atomism, Stewart proposes a cosmic sensitive to its creatures with built-in moral imperatives. It is important to note here that atomism and materialism and even atheism are all legitimate positions in Hinduism. This is the best way to think of pre-Socratic world as well in Greek philosophy. Atheism is a religious doctrine. Materialism is a traditional point of view. In the first instance, Stewart is coming from the traditional viewpoint. It is an idea he found in India and walked all the way back to Scotland. Stewart's was not a modern materialism, but rather his own rendition of an older and more traditional materialism. Even among materialisms, modern materialism is a deviation. This was one of Stewart's realisations. Attempts to explain consciousness as an epiphenomenon of material processes often encounter the conclusion that If that is the case, what we call matter has properties and potentialities of which the physicist and chemist take no account. If materialism is true, then matter is weird. If consciousness is an epiphenomenon of matter, then matter is very weird. The philosophy of walking Stewart fits somewhere into that train of thinking, although it's not a universal consciousness he proposes. He was not an Advaita Vedantist, but rather a universal sensorium. We can blame him for not developing his thought rigorously and to limiting it to a moral vision. He seemed unclear and cared little about details. He was merely enthused by the notion that the cosmos is sensate and our experiences are not lost. Our joys and our pains don't just disappear as a vapour into the void, nor are they noted and judged by a supreme being. Rather, they have an inherent function in the physical universe, an impact upon the very stuff of things. As a philosophy, it has the virtue of being non-dual. His ideas have often been labelled pantheistic, but that's a lazy and unhelpful categorisation. Stewart's feats of walking, to coin a phrase, were perhaps more impressive than his philosophy, but I think he also stands out as a model in his philosophical demeanour. He had a noble disregard for all other thinkers, although he once did give a nod to Spinoza, while stressing that he had reached his conclusions long before and independent of Spinoza, and resisted any comparisons with Spinoza's alleged pantheism. Stewart's much more interesting than Spinoza. His fierce determination to be an independent thinker and to test everything against his own experience and to use his perambulations through life as his first resource is surely commendable, as was his habit of reading as little of other philosophers as possible. Shunning bookishness, he was a philosopher of immediate experience. There is much to be said, I think, for unschooled book of life philosophers. Stewart's sacred text was the road from Madras to Glasgow, then around Africa and back. He had a right to be sure of his sources. He died whilst taking a stroll to Timbuktu. In any case, he was right in supposing that walking forms a firm foundation for thinking, and in insisting in his own way that body and mind are one. He wasn't interested in the yogi who sits motionless in the lotus position in order to transcend physicality. Instead, he found in India, and half-baked it, a materialism of an interconnected cosmic order that was at once physical and spiritual in its ramifications. He thought that a sensate materialism would account for the high spirituality of India and the practical materialism of Europe. Not transcendence, but embodiment. In this way, his philosophy is inseparable from his walking. We might make jokes about it being pedestrian, but as an example of the quest for a unified account of reality, the philosophy of walking Stewart, the greatest of all walkers, should be regarded as a noble attempt at least, and, more impressively, a model of commitment to the road of life.